What's up, everybody? This is Damp. I just wanted to make a video per the request of some of the guys who have been coming into my stream asking about best in class trinket setups, what my opinions were, to give some context behind my credibility. I just hit like 240 hours, and most of the people who have helped create the document that I'll link below are in between 300 and probably 400 hours that have been coming in the stream and giving tips and tricks to what they feel have been the best setups. So I'm kind of going to go quickly through this. This won't cover all of them. It's not all encompassing. You can see the recommendations in the document below, but I want to give context to why we chose what we did. And this is as of build 7910, which is like March 30th, 2015. So if you're looking for something a little more recent, I'll probably have some new videos as more content comes out closer to full release. So we'll start with the Crusader and kind of give some background on why we chose what we did with the Crusader. So our Crusader, typical setup for the Crusader is going to be for like a tanking class. A couple advantages to this setup. This trinket setup that you're looking at here is one, the Knight's Crest is pretty readily available, and the Tough Ring is one of the harder ones to come by, but you could supplement 2 Knight's Crests or even a Berserk Charm instead of this if need be. But the main setup that I like to run is the Tough Ring and the Knight's Crest, those two. This is because if you run 2 Tough Rings, you'll run into a dodge sink where you'll only have 1 dodge. At least with 13, you have a prayer that you're going to dodge once in a while. Endgame, you're going to switch this up a little bit, but this is for, like, let's say level 3 dungeons moving forward. So as we look at the second setup I'd recommend is mostly if you're going to use them in a DPS setting, and I'm either going to run a Tough Ring or a Berserk Charm, or a Legendary Bracer and a Berserk Charm, depending on what buffing classes you have to offset. If you have a Plague Doctor that can buff damage, I'll probably swap the Berserk Charm for the Legendary Bracer. Again, it's all going to depend on what trinkets you have to play with, but this is one of the more common ones that I would recommend. Berserk Charm's not too hard to find, and the Tough Ring's really, really versatile. We're going to use it with a lot of the classes, and what it allows you to do is get the prot will protect you from really getting crit to death in most circumstances, unless you're either getting marked and hit and crit. That's going to be a bad day for you. You could have 2 Tough Rings on. It's not necessarily gonna help. The second piece of it is that as you look at max HP, the max HP bonus that it gives is really, really solid. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with all of these. You guys can come into the chat and ask some questions or leave something in the comments if you want some clarification on why we did it. But the 2 combinations I'd recommend would be for more DPS, Tough Ring and Berserk Charm. You could be a little more offensive and swap out that for a Legendary Bracer and a Berserk Charm if you have, a Jester to offset the accuracy loss. And then the second one, 2 Knight's Crests. Third one, you could run a Tough Ring and the Knight's Crest if you're going to do a boss fight and you want it to be fairly tanky. So that is the 3 main ones that I'd recommend with Crusader. Moving on to the Highwayman, which is my personal favorite class. My most run-of-the-mill, average setup, conservative setup that I'm going to run is going to be the Legendary Bracer and the Focus Ring. The Focus Ring will offset your accuracy loss, so you're not going to run into as much of the miss or dodge scenario. And it will also help if you have rabies. If you're lucky enough to get rabies, don't get rid of it. It's really good right now. Secondary option for Highwayman is running 2 dodgy sheaths if you want him to be a dodge tank. And this would allow you to ensure with this setup that he's the guy in the front that's going to run point blank shot. Outside of that, you could run 2 Legendary Bracers, which I don't have on skip here, but if you ran 2 of these guys, 2 of these Legendary Bracers would be a pretty good setup as well. Again, you're going to have some accuracy loss, so make sure you have somebody there to buff some accuracy loss, whether it's a Vestal from their camping buff, which is seen here, or a Jester with the Battle Ballad, which gives you 6 accuracy without stacking. So that kind of covers the Highwayman. Moving on to the Helyan. Elyan is, again, one of the best classes in the game. If you want to be a little aggressive, most people usually say, I'm going to take 2 Hell's Hairpins. So 2 of these guys. Sorry, my trinkets are a little messy. The problem with this is there is no death blow resist. So if you run into the situation where you're running into a bad RNG fight, you might lose a level 6 character. If you're willing to take that chance, that's fine. But I don't think you're going to be once you get to level 6 and see how long it takes to get there and to cap the XP. So the tough ring gives you a little bit of a buffer with the prot that's included on here. And her dodge is pretty good too as well. I won't say that it's bad for sure. But the Hell's Hairpin and the tough ring is a good setup. Secondary setup I'd tell you to run would be this one, which is Bleeding Pennant, one of the best trinkets in the game. It's probably going to be nerfed at some point because it's a common trinket, but for the Helyan, it's great. You can use it through level 6 and it's viable. And then also you're going to use the Legendary Bracer again. You're going to take a little bit of an accuracy loss, but she can buff through that if you need to, or you could obviously bring a Jester, and you guys will notice that's a reoccurring theme. Jester is really underutilized, but it's really good if you use it correctly. Some people will say the stun amulet's another setup you want to run if you want to run her as a stun bot. Personally, I don't stun. I think it's a waste of a turn. Once you get to turn 5, you're taking a risk that you're going to get increased stress also, so I don't recommend it, but that's another option. From there, we have the Leper, and this is the standby that I will run pretty much always with the Leper. Berserk Mass to give him more HP, more damage, 2 speed, pretty good. He's going to incur a little more stress, but you can offset that with crits and dark runs. And then the Focus Ring, which offsets his typically usually pretty bad accuracy, even late game. That one's pretty good right there. So this is what I would say is going to be your mainstay. When you look at other things you could do, you could swap those two and be a little more aggressive. Again, if you have the Jester to buff your accuracy, but you're going to get dodged and you're going to miss because the accuracy mod's a 0, even though he's capped. From there, you could run this setup, make him a little more offensive. He won't have the dodge, and he loses 13 HP to do that, but that's another setup that's pretty good. Again, these are the assumption that you guys are going to have a lot of ancestral stuff. This is mid to late game. I'll do another video where we're going to talk about filler trinkets and what to use at that time then. So moving on to the Plague Doctor, currently it's one of the weakest classes in the game. I can't give you a ton of recommendations because I don't think it's very viable in its current state. Endgame, it gets resisted a lot unless you offset it with the Blasphemous Vial seen here. So if you're trying to use it offensively, you at least need one of these. It's still going to get resisted, and its front-end damage isn't enough. So the Berserk Charm's another thing you could try to use to increase your damage, but then it's going to get resisted. So if you're going to use it as a buff bot, run Feather Crystals, seen here. If you're going to run it offensively, you probably have to run something like this. You really can't use Legendary Bracer on its own because if you notice, accuracy mod goes to 0. She's going to miss, and it is a she. So there's a few different options you can use here. If you're only going to use her to buff with your damage and maybe use Battlefield Medicine, which again, why are you bringing her unless you just need to level her? You run Feather Crystals so she can dodge tank a little bit and still get that speed so she can get the buff in early in the fight. But currently not a very viable character. I'd expect her to get a lot of love and affection later on. Unless I'm missing some knowledge about her that I don't understand. But currently just that damage buff, not really that good. And she gets resisted a lot currently late game with both Bleed and Blight. So I'm going to move on from the Plague Doctor and go to the Bounty Hunter. So moving on to the Bounty Hunter, you have a couple different options. This is the one I think is really the best, which is Legendary Bracer and Berserk Charm. Again, he might miss. His accuracy mod 0 once you carry that Legendary Bracer. Jester's a good offset, but if you don't take Legendary Bracer or your guy has rabies, you definitely want to run the Focus Ring. Here, you'd swap those two. Those are really the most common that I use. Another one is a Tough Ring and the Berserk Charm because his HP is not very high and bosses like to like to pick on him with only a 45 HP. It's gonna make you a very bad day if the pig picks on you twice in a row. So that is an overview on the bounty hunter. Moving on to the Vestal. Vestal actually can be used really, really well offensively. She crits a lot to manage her crits. She doesn't give a lot of damage. It's kind of similar to the Grave Robber, but she can crit significantly if you utilize correctly. Judgment's a very, very good spell. But typically most people are using her to heal. So this is my favorite healing setup. She gets a little bit of a speed buff with this. You don't need to worry about damage because she probably won't be used in a damage sense if you're bringing her to run healing. And then Tough Ring, obviously, to protect her. 2 Tough Rings, she becomes a bit of a monster. You look at her 62 HP and a back row character that's not seeing a lot of attention typically, and her prot's 15%. That's pretty good. It's pretty solid there. You know, the other option, if you want to be a little more aggressive, you could run 2 of the chalices here. I'm not going to dig through the inventory, but 2 of these is a good setup also. The speed buff's really nice, so she can go first and guarantee you that she could get a heal in case of a bad time. Moving from the Vestal, like I was talking about, one of the most underutilized classes is the Jester, and I'm not going to talk a lot about his offensive spells, but he's a buff bot. That's what you're going to use him for. Run 2 of these, 2 feather crystals, so he goes first, and he goes early and often, and then just spam the Battle Ballad. Currently it stacks. I believe that's going to go away, but use it while you can. Cast 2-3 stacks of this, and if somebody's, you know, very low health, you could use him offensively. Don't use the stress heal, especially if you're running dark runs. This doesn't do you any good. A lot of times there's diminishing returns or bad RNG that's associated with this, so you don't really have to worry about that from that setting. So looking at the Jester, this is the what I'd recommend the most. I mean, you're going to use him buff bot more than likely. Another option, if you don't have 2 feather crystals, throw in a camouflage cloak. That's another good one to do. Or you could use Focus Ring and Bloody Dice if you want to use it to bleed. But again, late game, mid game, bleeds get resisted far too often for them to be viable, even with a buff to them. Take straight line damage, that really can't be resisted. So from there, we're going to go to Grave Robber, another class I don't utilize too much, but this is the best setup for a Grave Robber in my opinion, which is Legendary Bracer and Focus Ring. Another offset would be Archer's Ring. Some of the other things you'd consider with the Grave Robber, 2 of the Legendary Bracers, but she misses a lot for me. Some people say that she doesn't ever miss. I find that she misses really consistently in 2 Legendary Bracers. Again, accuracy mod 0, late game she's going to miss a lot. She's going to crit a ton, but if you don't have a Jester or you don't have a buff that's offsetting the amount that she's going to miss, it might not be worth that. So I say you stick with Legendary Bracer and Focus Ring. That's just my opinion. Moving from her, we'll talk a little bit about the Occultist. And this is one of the most underutilized offensive classes. He is great offensively. He crits a ton. He hits pretty significantly if you're running this setup, which is 2 Demon's Cauldrons, which was just nerfed. Just noticed that today. Well, this was 5% 2 days ago, so sorry guys. Edit that out. So I expected it to get nerfed. I didn't think it'd get nerfed this quickly, but this just got nerfed, so ignore that for now. Instead, run a Legendary Bracer and a Focus Ring. That's what I'd offset that with. And then when you look at defensively, everyone always says he's going to bleed. You know, he's not going to bleed when he uses this. He will bleed maybe 1 out of every 100 fights, running a Cleansing Crystal and a Tough Ring. So if you're running the Reconstruction spell, make sure to offset a Cleansing Crystal, and you can use him to heal independently. And the Tough Ring, because his HP really isn't that great, he can get one-shotted. It gives you a little bit of space to play with there. That's it. That's what I'd run with on the Occultist. That's crazy they just nerfed that. Unless it's bugged currently, which it could be, but it didn't get announced in the patch notes. So that is it for what I would recommend late game. mid to late game, I should say. So if you guys have any questions or want to give me some feedback, I stream 3 or 4 nights a week. You can see my schedule on the link I'll put below. Please feel free to come in the chat. Usually there's guys that have had a lot of them 300 hours in the game that can give you a lot of different expertise. We really like to help noobs. So come on down. The next video I'll make will be really about filler trinkets, which are early game trinkets that you need to focus on to make your growth of your estate a little bit easier. So thanks for watching. See you.